Elle, there was something watching me play in the garden earlier. I saw it in the trees. Don't be silly, it's probably just an animal or something. It wasn't. Don't be a scaredy cat. Tell Mom and Dad if you're worried. Why are you in my room anyway? Leave me alone. That was the last interaction I had with my little sister. Irene didn't protest or even attempt to say another word when I dismissed her. She just skulked off, presumably used to my crappy prepubescent attitude that had blossomed around that time. I was 10 years old and just starting to develop any kind of interest in being cool. My 8-year-old sibling just didn't make the cut, especially not when she still believed in fairy tales. Irene was a creative child, almost to a fault. She was convinced there were fairies, nymphs, and gnomes, alive and well, populating the corners of the world that people didn't look in. I thought she was utterly ridiculous, despite secretly wishing I lived in her make-believe world. Now, with the job I have and the things that I've witnessed, I deeply regret writing off her stories completely. I had spent a lifetime running from my guilt. I don't know for a fact that she ever spoke to my parents about the Watcher, but I suspected that she did, and that their guilt over ignoring it was what solidified our family's downward spiral. Is it a little sick that I resented her? In my mind, Irene got to spend eternity in fairy tale land, never growing up and dealing with reality, while I was left to clean up the drunken mess my parents became. It didn't seem fair when I was a little kid. It didn't seem fair as an adult either. Especially not as I sat in my car, severed finger in its box in one hand, and a return ticket to Thistle Park Station in the other, parked up by my workplace on my day off. I felt quite farcical following the advice of a strangely knowing old lady. A lady who had outright said that there was potential for the finger to be a dead end, a game. There were a million other things I could have been doing that weren't chasing answers to an impossible question. Either way, I felt a responsibility to the memory of my sister to at least check, regardless of my desperate previous attempts to numb the pain by forgetting all about her. Her being alive would change so much. If Irene was out there, I had to bring her home. I lifted my hood to avoid being seen by any of my coworkers. I didn't work alongside the day crew often, but we intermingled from time to time, and I didn't feel like sharing my deep, familial trauma with them. I knew my boarding one of the trains would have caused quite a stir. Skulking past the ticket booth, I noticed Amanda, my daytime counterpart, frantically cleaning the desk. I had never interacted with her, but I had always been mightily irritated by the booth smelling of bleach. I complained about it to Atlas nearly constantly. She was an obsessive cleaner, and I always arrived to an immaculate workstation that I would soon turn into my preferred chaos. It took quite the resolve not to peek in and ask her to stop. I managed through the urge, continuing on to the platform. Thistle Park was situated on the Village Line, a few stops beyond Monsoon Valley but way before Coeur d'Alene Hill, where the train terminated. It brought me some comfort that I wasn't going too far from home. The journey, if it ran according to schedule, should have only taken me 46 minutes. I settled on a bench at the far end of Platform 5, noticing a few familiar-looking youths on bikes by the stairs at the other end, waiting for the same train as I was. They were regulars at the station, often passing through late at night, inconspicuous in dark tracksuits, always on bikes. They never caused me any particular bother, but I noticed that no matter how often I had encountered them, I never saw their faces. It seemed the angle was always off, but it felt like it was more than that. One uneventful night, I even made a game of it, watching them on every camera I could to catch a glimpse. No avail. They were no different on the platform, playing and interacting with each other, moving around freely, just never turning quite enough for me to see a face. The faceless youth, as I lovingly nicknamed them, had always seemed relatively harmless while I was working. But crossing the threshold onto the platform and facing the prospect of traveling to the destinations that I had always found mysterious had left me with a deeply uncomfortable feeling in my gut. Even passengers as innocuous as them seemed more dangerous without my plexiglass fortress and security button. More sinister. I tried Googling some of the stations when I first started, without any real results. The stations that we serve don't appear on any other line in the city, and judging by the passengers that travel to them, I wasn't sure I would be entirely welcome. I didn't fit in, and amongst the eccentric customers, my incredible plainness stuck out like a sore thumb. Now approaching Platform 5 is the Village Line service to Quarter Line Hill. Please stand clear and mind the gap between the train and the platform. My legs wobbled as I got up from the bench and tried to remain steady while the train sped to a stop. My anxiety irritated me. I don't know what I expected. To be eaten by some sort of monster within moments of embarking on my journey. Ridiculous. The thoughts of Irene kept me focused. There were only 2 other passengers in my carriage. An older man, maybe late 40s, sat in the left corner facing the window, and central was a teenage girl. The girl was disheveled looking, washed out pink hair sticking up in all directions, and dirty, slightly ripped clothing. She had headphones stuck over her ears, creating a gentle, rhythmic hum throughout the small space. I hesitated for a moment before settling on a seat. Compared to some of the more eccentric customers, my 2 carriage mates were positively average. That was until the man let out a gentle growl, helping ease my decision to sit closer to the girl and also to the exit. As the train pulled away, the robotic announcer told us that the first stop would be Monsoon Valley. I sunk into my seat, thinking about the explosive man from the shift the night before. Atlas had laughed about the staff at Monsoon Valley having to deal with him, and being so close we had frequent contact with the guys working there. Despite this, I had never once wondered what Monsoon Valley looked like. Is that strange? All the customers, the destinations, the incidents, and never a moment of curiosity. I wondered if there was something wrong with me. I watched out the window as the cityscape entered winding fields that I never knew were so nearby. It seemed almost impossible that such vast expanses of natural beauty could be so close to a concrete jungle. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the pink-haired girl glance at me on occasion, and I was careful not to make eye contact. The closer we got to Monsoon Valley, the more unbelievable the landscape became. The winding fields became deep valleys between intimidating, rolling banks and hills. The sky outside the window, despite it only being early afternoon, was a dusky shade of lavender. The change was sharp, from blue to purple, eliciting an audible gasp that I tried to stifle. Beautiful and otherworldly, a glaring reminder that I was somewhere entirely new. The train slowed as we reached a picturesque village. Smatterings of cottages set in beautiful plots of land with rivers separating them littered the view as we reached a quaint station that sported a hand-carved wooden platform sign. Welcome to Monsoon Valley, home to the end of the rainbow. I felt my brow furrow as I struggled to conceal my confusion and amazement, pulling my hood further over my head in a pathetic and frankly futile attempt to hide how out of place I felt from my carriage mates. Home to the end of the rainbow. I wish I could say that didn't make me want to step off the train and chase the impossible location that it promised. Had it not been for the red body part box in my pocket, I probably would have done just that. It felt as if we sat in that beautiful, quaint little station for an eternity. Like the driver was tormenting the valiant explorer inside of me, goading me. I was grateful when the doors finally shut that no one new enjoyed my carriage. Everything I could see of Monsoon Valley was gorgeous, but almost too much so. The idyllic little area had a mysterious feel, and not one that I really liked. I wondered what sort of people might live in a place like this. Next stop, Blackwater Place. Change for the Epstar line. I wondered what the next stop would look like, and more importantly, what Thistle Park was going to bring. Monsoon Valley had surprised me, although I wasn't sure where my expectations had started. I didn't get long to delve too deeply into my thoughts because, mere moments after we pulled away from the quaint little station, the pink-haired girl stood up and took a seat directly next to me. "You're not a local, are you?" she asked, a knowing smile in her eyes. I ignored her at first, hoping that she would just go back to her seat and stop bothering me, but she was persistent. "Where are you headed?" "Hey!" She got closer and closer to my face until there were only millimeters between us, revealing crusted makeup and open sores on her own. "Thistle Park," I answered eventually through gritted teeth, giving minimal information in the hope that she would at least back away. She didn't. "Oh, ever been there before? I bet you haven't." "How would you know?" "If you looked that scared at the last place, then you definitely haven't been to Thistle Park. The valley is for suckers chasing the rainbow, a holiday compared to the park." Engaging with the girl terrified me, but not half as much as going into my situation blind did. Even if, best way, Irene was alive and well in Thistle Park, I still had no idea where I was going to start looking. Maybe she could provide some answers. "Are you from here?" I asked nervously. The girl laughed. "No, I'm headed further up the line, but I've spent some time there. A nice, innocent-looking girl like you wants to be careful in a town like that." She licked her dry, cracked lips, picking up bits of what appeared to be day-old red lipstick flakes. I smelled stale cigarettes on her breath, and she scratched at her greasy hair that had flattened under her headphones, now perched on her shoulders. Everything about the girl was repugnant, but still, I couldn't bear to take my eyes away from her for even a single second. I was entranced by her, suddenly completely uninterested in the views outside of the window. She was all I saw. "My name is Penny. What's yours?" she asked, deep brown eyes fixed on mine. "It's Amanda," I answered, thinking on my feet and assuming the identity of my daytime counterpart, in an attempt to protect myself. It didn't work. "No, it isn't," she frowned. Those 3 words were said with such a seriousness and change in tone that I felt my heart stop for a couple of beats, just like it had when Agnes used my full name with such ease. I was defenseless from the moment the train pulled away, and I was starting to regret my impulsive decision to follow a note on a finger. "There's no purpose lying, is there, Elfilda?" I felt sick. "Who are you and where the heck am I?" I retorted. "I'm Penny. I already told you that. It doesn't matter where you are, but it does matter what you're looking for. And I know what you're looking for. Or maybe should I say, who you're looking for." I must have become visibly uncomfortable because Penny smirked before continuing. "I'm warm, aren't I? The resemblance is uncanny. I can't believe it took me an entire stop to work it out. You know where Irene is." My sister's name stumped Penny briefly. She genuinely looked dumbstruck for a moment before another smug grin stretched across her face. "You have no idea what you're doing, do you?" She laughed, throwing her head back in a wicked cackle, flakes of painted skin dancing on her lips. "Answer me, please." I remained transfixed on Penny, the background beginning to blacken as I lost all sense of anything but her mocking, disgusting face. I felt a fear and vulnerability that I wasn't used to and couldn't explain. It's like she put me in a vacuum and replaced all the oxygen with her laughter. It reverberated through my soul, making me feel tiny, powerless, weak. I felt so weak that I could barely sit up. I tried to look down at my hands to see if I could move them, but my head was frozen and she was all that I could see. The fear started to get worse and my chest pounded as I took in short, sharp breaths, desperate for air that she hadn't tainted or weighed down. How are you doing this? Doing what, Elfida? We're just having a conversation. Don't you enjoy my company? I think you need something to calm your nerves. I know. Music. Penny grabbed the headphones from around her neck and licked her lips furiously as she placed them on my own head. I fought my broken body to stop her, but it was pointless. I was completely paralyzed. The sounds that entered my ears and dug into my mind were horrific. Instead of the gentle humming that I had first noticed stepping into the carriage, the headphones blasted screaming and sounds of excruciating pain into my ears. It was a symphony of distress, torture, a cacophony of pain, and it made every bone, muscle, and organ inside me hurt. I don't know when I started to wail, but I did. That's it, be a part of the music, I read on Penny's lips, glee written all over her face, unable to hear her over the unimaginable screeching. I hadn't felt fear like that before. 1,000 abstract thoughts crossed my mind and I searched for something to distract me from the pain. What if I never even made it to Thistle Park? What if I died here on this train, at the hands of a dirty teenage girl? What if Irene was out there and I couldn't save her? The black splotches blotting out the view behind Penny grew, taking over her face, and I screamed and pleaded for air, desperate not to die. I felt faint and the world started to blur. She started to blur. Then a crash. It came from the back of the carriage and was the result of the doors that connected us to the next car smashing, glass raining down on the floor. Penny turned, breaking the eye contact and providing me with some minor relief. Paralysis waning, I yanked the headphones off and pelted them at the floor, craving the end of the torment. My vision started to stabilize and I noticed that the growling man in the corner was turned, facing the two of us as Penny stood, hissing at the newcomers who had burst through the adjoining door. The man had teeth like nothing I had ever seen before, crowding his mouth and overhanging at sharp points in all directions. I would have usually spent longer inappropriately staring at the man. Even in my line of work, fangs were uncommon, especially ones as mighty as he was sporting. I didn't get a chance to linger on them, however, I was interrupted. Penny screamed. I tried not to look, hugging my knees to my chest and screwing my eyes up tightly to avoid whatever was terrorizing something as unnerving as she was. Her scream was followed by the sounds of ripping and tearing, whimpers, and then eventually silence. "Are you all right, miss?" a young boy's voice asked, breaking the quiet. Slowly, I opened one eye, noticing spokes and rubber. Penny laid on the floor, no obvious signs of breathing, with what appeared to be a tire-patterned wound across her face and chest. The entire aisle was littered with bikes. The faceless youth stood at the angles I expected to see them, hoods up and turned just enough to conceal any identifying features. All except for one. I looked up at my nearest rescuer, finally catching a glimpse of his face after all the wondering. I tried to hide my shock as I did, but with what I saw, it was a challenging task. He didn't just have one face. He had three.